Hi guys, I am Sydney McLaughlin-Levrone and I am doing a chapter by chapter through my new book, Far Beyond Gold, Running from Fear to Faith. I am so excited to go through this book with you guys, so let's hop right in. So chapter 1 drops you right into the action of where I was at 16 years old. I was a junior in high school and this was me at the Olympic trials. Just writing this book and going back to that time period in my life was so surreal for me. I think I had pushed so much of that out of my mind because it was such a stressful time in life that it was almost hard to kind of recall some of those moments. But from the help of old coaches, my parents, my siblings, I was able to remember a lot of those emotions and feelings. But the overall theme of chapter 1 was really just a misplaced sense of identity that I had placed since I was 6 years old in winning, thinking that that was my value, that was my purpose, and that was my meaning. And I'm sure a lot of you can relate to that, whether it's work, whether it's relationships, whether it's just aspirations and passions that you have. We all tend to, at times, especially before we know God and truly know who He is and why Christ died for us, we tend to place our identity in something that it's not supposed to be in. And so for me, that was winning. And I think chapter 1 is a clear depiction of 16-year-old me struggling with that. But as I came to grow in my faith and know more about my true identity in Christ, Colossians 3 talks about setting your mind on things above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Not things that are on the earth, not things that take place in our everyday lives, because those will pass away. And it's brought so much peace to me to know that it's not dependent on whether I win or lose a race. It's dependent on Christ, who is unchanging. Now, chapter 2, in my opinion, is a continuation of chapter 1. Why? Because I think it truly also just speaks to where I was in this time of life. And honestly, looking back on writing these first 2 chapters, they broke my heart for young Sydney, to just see how lost she was and how fear had completely taken control of her life. In a season that should have been so joyful and so fun, I was completely crippled with fear. This is a chapter about getting ready for Rio, leaving the Olympic trials, making the team, and now you're preparing for the biggest moment in any athlete's life, which is the Olympics. I just turned 17 years old, and that month between the trials and the Olympics were so confusing, right? You've just made the team. You weren't expected to make the team. It's a joyful moment. Your whole family, your whole town, everybody's so excited. At the same time, you're preparing to go and race the best in the world. And at 17 years old, I had no idea what I was doing. So in here, you will see a little bit about my diet, which was terrible. Lots of McDonald's, lots of Wendy's, and lots of Twizzlers were involved. I don't regret it because at the time, I didn't know any better. I was just trying to cope with the fact that I was going to this insane place. But at the same time, it probably wasn't the best ideal situation for preparing also for the most important race of my life. But at the same time, I think fear in this moment robbed me of the joy that should have been taking place. This was an incredible once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for a lot of people, and to have it at such a young age, I did not enjoy that process. I didn't enjoy getting ready because I was so nervous about what the outcome would be, about what people would think of me, about what I would think of myself. Was I going to be a failure? And so John 10:10 talks about how the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And in that moment, he really stole from me my hope, my joy. He killed any sense of faith that I had in what was to come, and he destroyed, honestly, my view of myself, my view of my career, where I was going to go. But the verse finishes by saying that Christ came to give us life and life abundantly. And I think as I've grown in my faith, I've seen him continue to just renew that sense of hope and life in me, and give me a sense of purpose that's beyond anything I could have imagined. And so I don't know where you are with that, if you feel like the enemy is trying to steal things from you, destroy things in your life, or just root fear so deep that there's nothing that really pulls you out. But my encouragement to you is what I wish I knew in this season of my life, which is to turn to Christ, who gives life and life more abundantly. Chapter 3 talks about while I'm in Rio, just that journey. Obviously, you'll see in here that I get sick on the way. a long flight, the longest of my life, and by the time I arrive, I have a fever. The first week of being there was not ideal, but it definitely just tested where I was mentally and physically and emotionally. And honestly, I failed that test in all three of those ways. In this chapter, you see just how I was so worried about being the best, being perfect, that my perfectionism took a hold of my whole Olympic experience. For me, it was like, if I can't be the best and if I can't be perfect, then what's the point in trying? And as you see at the end of the chapter, I honestly rob myself of an opportunity by making sure I don't make it to the final. Something to this day I look back on and I regret, but at the time, it's just a testimony of how lost I was in that fear and how much of a hold it had on me. And honestly, I think perfectionism is something that a lot of people struggle with. The idea of everything has to be a specific way, and if not, what's the point? But in Allie Beth Stuckey's book, You Are Not Enough, and That's Okay, which is very countercultural to what we hear all the time today, that you are enough, that you are loved, all these things. We're not enough. And I think the Bible is a clear depiction of why we need Christ, because we all fall short of the glory of God, as Romans 3 says. And I think in that moment in time, I wish I had known that I needed to lean on someone besides myself, because in my own strength, I can't do it. And that's the beauty of having Christ, is that he died for us, that we can rely on him, that he is sufficient, that he's unchanging, and that he can fulfill all that we are lacking in him. Chapter 4 talks about two very big transitions that took place coming back from Rio. The first one would be finishing my senior year of high school, something that not a lot of Olympians had to do coming back from Rio that year, but also my transition going into college. So the transition from high school to college, I think both of those kind of intertwined were just very confusing to navigate. Here you are on the biggest stage in the world. You now have over 100,000 followers out of nowhere overnight. You come back to high school. And I think for me, I had to be honest in assessing myself that I think I was definitely a little cocky coming back to my senior year. When it comes to high school, we're all going through so many changes in life and so many just seasons that are different than what we're used to, that, hormones are raging, teenage girls tend to always have drama. And I really had to assess myself and how much of a role did I play in that, especially when it came to my teammates and just some of the drama that we had my senior year. But overall, nobody writes a book on that. Nobody tells you how to come back from such a crazy experience and come back to life and be normal about it. But the thing that I wish I had known is that if I knew Christ and if I had the Bible and I was following his teachings, I probably would have handled it a lot better. I would have had a grounds and a means for a roadmap, a blueprint of how to be humble, how to submit, how to be a good friend and a good leader. But I didn't have those at the time. And I think I was searching for something. I talked to therapists, I talked to friends, and I tried to just find some sort of counsel and reason. But a beautiful word that describes God is omniscient, meaning he knows everything. And in those times, I wish I had known that I could have gone to him and truly just sought that wisdom that only he has in order to handle some of these situations a lot better. So we leave off chapter 4 with me leaving college, and I am now turning pro after only 1 year. And chapter 5 jumps right into what that process looks like. So track and field is very interesting in this regard of how you go pro. First and foremost, for me, I started out by picking an agent. I was blessed to be able to have not only a track agent, but a commercial agent. Shout out Rob. Who helps me in getting endorsement deals and doing all of those different kinds of things. And so from there, we then went into shoe contracts, which was quite the process, as you will see in the book. But I ultimately ended up on, honestly, just the best decision for me that I could have made, which was New Balance. And they have been the best partners ever since, honestly, like family. And it's just been a blessing to be able to build with them. But chapter 5 continues to go through that first year of being a pro, moving to California, going through the first World Championships in Doha, and it ends in a loss, multiple losses to multiple world records, with me being in second place. And by the end of that, if coming back from Rio, navigating college, finishing high school, all of that wasn't enough and just feeling completely lost, I now am a professional doing what I've wanted to do my entire life, and I'm losing to world records in my event. And so for me, that was rock bottom. And I think chapter 5 really shows you that. Just, I did not know where to go. And I think a lot of people can relate to that, especially seasons of just things feeling like they're kind of going downhill. But as you'll see as we continue the book, God knew that I was coming to the end of myself and that ultimately I was going to need to rely on him. And I think chapter 5 is just a huge stepping stone in that. Chapter 5 rolls right into chapter 6. They almost could be conjoined if you wanted, in terms of what season of life I was in. So I had just come back from Doha. I had gotten second to Delilah, who broke the world record in an amazing time. And I was feeling very down on myself. And so if track wasn't giving me the validation I needed, then I looked for it somewhere else. And that next place was relationships. From relationships to material possessions to social media, whatever it was, I was just looking for something that would validate me, because the number one thing in my life at the time, which was winning, was not. And so it just was a testimony of showing that you could have everything that you want in the world, but it will never satisfy you. I think I could have been content with being the second fastest woman ever, but I wasn't. I could have been content with having a new contract and living in a new place and having a new car, but I wasn't. I could have been content with the friendships and relationships I had, but I still wasn't, because ultimately they were all in vain. I was looking at them for what they could give me, not how could I serve others? And ultimately it wasn't through the proper lens of looking at it how Christ wants me to look at it, which is he is ultimate authority in my life. And I am here humbly serving because of him. He's blessed me with an opportunity to be saved. And ultimately from there flows everything else that I can be grateful for, material possessions and friendships and all of the platforms that he's given me. But at the time, I took all of those for granted, and I was just digging myself deeper into a hole until, like I said, COVID and all of that just finally broke me. Trying to go through therapy and, what that looked like, and ultimately just realizing there has to be a better way of living. And that's when I finally decided to surrender my life to God. Chapter 7 is my conversion story, basically my testimony and my surrender to Christ. And instead of going through the actual chapter, I just want to give a little bit of a gospel presentation for anyone who may be watching. My whole life, I felt like I was running from God because I feared that if I had surrendered my life to him, I would be giving up my freedom, right? My view of the Bible growing up was basically rules and regulations of what you can and can't do in order to be a good person so that you can go to heaven. But I didn't understand Jesus. I didn't understand why he came. I didn't understand the importance of his life until COVID 2020, when I was truly just looking for any sense of understanding of God. I was finally done running from him, and he was so patient and waiting for me to finally just come back. Ultimately, we're all born in sin. From Adam and Eve all the way till now, we've all fallen short of the glory of God, like I said, Romans says. Ultimately, God is so holy and so pure and so perfect that he cannot be in the presence of sin. And that's why we needed someone to die on our behalf, to be that sacrifice for us, that we can be in God's presence once again. And so Jesus is that perfect sacrifice, being both God and man, risen from the dead. He has conquered death for us so that we may have eternal life with God in heaven. And so for me, when I was understanding this and coming to this realization, Colossians 3 really was what made me finally click into understanding that, where we are to put off our old selves, for we have died with Christ, and when he rises, we shall rise again with him. So it's no longer I who lives, but it's Christ who lives in me. That is the beauty of what this chapter talks about, and honestly, what transformed my life is I'm no longer running, I'm no longer living for myself, I'm living for him, for he has died for me and raised to life for me. And that is what's been so amazing, just to be able to share and proclaim with the world. And that's why since chapter 7 till now and till eternity, I will no longer proclaim myself, but I will proclaim him. Chapter 7 also mentions and explains the story of how I met my husband, Andre. Don't want to forget about that part. I hope you guys enjoyed and loved reading that part as well. As we move on to chapter 8, this is a chapter that takes us from the point of my conversion all the way through the Olympic trials, which I would say is about an 8-month period. I could be wrong. Just go with me. It's about 8 months. And so that culmination of that season, just trusting the process, this is not just my faith now being transformed. It's also my entire life. I now am dating Andre. I've changed coaches to Bobby, and everything is just brand new, but it's exciting at the same time. It's amazing to see it culminate in the Olympic trials being the end of the chapter, which if you know track and field, you know that is where I broke the world record for the first time. It was a very special day, and honestly, I will never forget it because I truly, for the first time in my life, felt God's presence with me running on the track. I remember that day like it was yesterday. From the heat delays to the false starts and the trials and the prelims and all of those things. And God truly just brought that whole meet to a beautiful ending with the world record. I really hope that this chapter excites you as much as it excited me to write, because being able to relive all of those moments just brought me back to an amazing place and time. And I really hope it blesses you. We've now arrived at Chapter 9, which is the Tokyo Olympics, which were supposed to be held in 2020, but because of COVID have been pushed to 2021. Everything looked different now, whether it was the preparation or the process of going over to the games or even just being there. We were COVID tested every single day. We wore masks everywhere. There was social distancing, even in the cafeteria. All of the bedrooms, everything looked very different than my first Olympic experience, but I wouldn't trade it for the world. Honestly, I was so grateful that I was still able to go to the Olympics, that I was able to get the experience again, and by the grace of God, walk away with 2 gold medals. I was just so humbled that we were still able to have that whole thing happen. Obviously, I was bummed that my family and friends couldn't be there to celebrate with me, but as you'll see, that one of my high school friends was actually there with NBC. He had a sign, and I know for a fact that Andre, my family, everyone was screaming their heads off back home. So this is a really exciting chapter to read. I hope that you feel like you're in the moment when you're reading it, and I know that I definitely felt some of those adrenaline and nerves again for sure when I was writing it. Now on to Chapter 10, where I come back from Tokyo to an amazing birthday present and celebration present, which is my engagement to Andre. Well, there's a wedding band now, but that was a huge surprise and just an amazing season of life, from the Olympics to my engagement to planning a wedding now. A lot was changing in a short period of time, but I was just so excited to take on all of life's challenges with him. Planning a wedding during a track season is absolutely absurd, and I do not recommend. But at the same time, if you're like me and you're crazy, then I do recommend. It was very fun. It was very eventful. I remember sitting down with Bobby at the beginning of the season and just telling him we're getting married in the middle of the season, and him saying, okay. And so that season for me was just a lot of faith, a lot of trusting that we were going to get done what we needed to on the track and off the track. A lot of going to practice and then coming home and planning a wedding, putting that into practice of not being in control. It literally rained so hard on our wedding day, and we were supposed to get married outside. And so there was actually tornado warnings and lightning, and we had to move everything inside, but it was really just a testimony of faith and trusting that this was God's plan, because everyone said that it was so much more beautiful inside than it would have been outside. I was very happy about that, because me, as a former perfectionist, was definitely a little stressed. But through prayer and a lot of faith, it ended up being the best day of my life. So Chapter 10 ends with the wedding, and Chapter 11 leads us into now post-wedding, going into the World Championships, which is about 2 months later. I remember coming home from the wedding on a Monday, and that night getting right into a sauna, sweating out whatever food and drinks I had from the wedding, which I wasn't drinking. I just had some soda and a lot of cake that I shouldn't have eaten. That was a whole thing for me. And from there, we were now in go mode. I remember putting the wedding behind us and saying, praise God, we're married, now let's go work. And so from there, it was complete laser focus on just getting ready for this World Championships. This World Championships was something that we definitely felt like we were prepared for all season. The training was just going absolutely amazing. And leading up, we knew that it was going to be something very, very special. The numbers were telling us that we were on record pace. And so whether it was the weeks before or even the days before. My whole team and I, we were all prepared and ready and knew what we were about to go do. And so it was just a matter, honestly, and Bobby kept saying it all week, is we're going to have faith and we're going to believe, because that's what we were prepared to do. Those were amazing days leading up. Everyone was just so excited and so ready to go out there and conquer this World Championships on American soil for the first time, where my family and Andre were in the crowd supporting me. It was honestly everything that unfortunately I missed out in Tokyo on was now happening in Eugene. You'll see in the chapter it culminates in a world record of 50.68, now my 4th world record in 13 months, which is unreal even to think about. And it just was a beautiful, beautiful day that I will just never forget. And I don't even think my words do it justice. I hope you can just see what I'm talking about in the book. Chapter 12 and the final chapter of the book is a looking forward. Where do we go from here? What's ahead? What's next? I talk a little bit about my injury from 2023 and just making the decision to just lay low, get ready for the years to come. And even within that, just God humbling me and continuing to teach me. There's a line that you'll see in the book that says, fear is a product of misplaced priorities. And I think this whole book kind of shows you that in putting God first in my life and surrendering to Christ, all of those things fall into place, and that those priorities become very clear and apparent. And I think moving forward, it's continuing to share the gospel, it's continuing to run for His glory and not my own, and it's continuing to just be a light in the world, because we're called to be set apart. And I think that this book, I pray that it's a encouragement to anyone who may be lost in fear, anyone who may be curious about their walk with God. I pray that this may be a light to you, and that you may ultimately seek Him through this book, and that my story may be one that hopefully shines some light on, why I am the way that I am, and moving forward, that He is the one that gets all the glory, not myself. 1 Peter 1 talks about how our inheritance is far beyond gold. And I think that was the inspiration for the title of this book. Whether I win, whether I lose, whether I break another record in my life, it doesn't matter, because Christ has already won, and I am in Him, and therefore I am victorious. Thank you so much for reading this book. I hope that, like I said, it's an encouragement to you and to those around you. This isn't YouTube, but you can't like, comment, subscribe. But at the same time, I just hope that you share this with someone that you love.